All right, so thank you, everyone. Of course, there's like the loud crunching starts right when we start the webinar, right? Um, good morning, or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our May Environmental Justice Collaborative Governance Committee meeting. I just wanted to give a couple of announcements at the top. Today's meeting, we're going to be talking about housing, and the EJCGC members, a few months ago, we talked about subjects that we were super interested in and that we wanted to have presentations on. And housing was one of them, but also homelessness. So I want to just frame that this conversation is going to be specific to housing and affordable housing part of the conversation. And at a later date, we're going to be having the conversation around homelessness. So I just want to say that up front. So we're kind of framing what our comments and framing the conversation appropriately. Some other announcements. So we have Veronica Beatty, who's going to be talking about some local work that's happening. I didn't get a bio from Veronica, but Veronica is amazing and is honestly the person that I consider to be the expert of affordable housing in my realm and circles, and has done affordable housing work for years. And we also have the city coming on that are going to talk about some things happening in the city. And I think we're also going to be talking about ADUs potentially, and other things going on in the city regarding housing. So I think we're going to start with a poll question. Or wait, I'm sorry, we're doing the poll question later, right? Sorry, Moyes. We'll do the poll question later, at a later point. And so we'll make announcements at the end, and we'll have time for everyone to make announcements at the end of the presentation. But for now, I think I'm just going to pass it to Veronica to get us started.
Awesome. Let me share my screen here. There we go. So, oh, here we are. I mean, I don't need any better introduction than being Nyla's go-to housing person, but just in case you're wondering why you're listening to me today, my background is in public policy. I concentrated on public policy issues that affect urban areas predominantly, and pretty quickly turned that into being the policy director at the Sacramento Housing Alliance. So I was with the Sacramento Housing Alliance for about 8 years. If you see that some of my statistics are a little out of date, please forgive me. It's been a minute since I've been talking about Sacramento issues, because I'm now working as the Director of Research and Policy at the California Coalition for Rural Housing. So a little bit more broadly focused in the Sacramento region. But I do try to keep my fingers in the pie as a board member of the Sacramento Community Land Trust. And that's predominantly the position from which I'm going to talk to you guys tonight. So I've done my best to become a little bit knowledgeable about a lot of things in housing. I've only got 15 minutes today, but I'm going to drop my contact information in the chat. By all means, email me, text me. Nyla knows I, spend my 8 o'clock hours just shooting the shit with people about how we could make new housing policy. So a little bit about the housing crisis in Sacramento. As of last year, Sacramento County as a whole needed more than 58,000 more affordable rental homes to meet the needs of its lowest income renters. And that's just talking about folks we consider very low income and extremely low income. When we talk about affordable housing, and by affordable housing I mean subsidized housing, i.e. we put public money into it, you'll hear these income bands come up over and over again. What we consider extremely low income, very low income, or just the median. So I encourage you all to take a moment to find yourself on this chart. You don't have to tell me where you land, but one of the things I find over and over is that people support affordable housing and they think that's for people that aren't them. But really, it's completely possible to be working a good living wage job and still end up priced out of Sacramento's housing market. One of the best pieces of advice I got when I started working at SHA was to get myself on the affordable housing wait lists then, because my nonprofit job didn't pay me enough to afford market rate housing, technically speaking, because how we measure housing affordability is that you should be spending no more than 30% of your income on your housing, which for most folks is pretty unachievable. That's why you see a lot of people being denied rentals because they can't prove they're making price the rent. And you'll talk to plenty of advocates who will say even 30% of your income is too much to be paying for housing. So, those are the income categories as of last year as set by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. So when you see a proposal come up through City Council that's talking about like a very low income housing development, that's the numbers they're talking about. Oh, and stock photos, I'm sorry, but just kind of some examples of, with your extremely low income band, you're often talking about seniors on Social Security, you're talking about folks coming in off the street. I know you're going to be talking about homelessness at a future meeting, and that's great. I do love to say that any housing conversation is a conversation about homelessness, because the solution to homelessness is housing. So of course, like any environmental justice issue, any social justice issue, housing affordability affects people of color disproportionately, and particularly women of color. Super unfortunately, this is the only data I've been able to find that somebody's made into a beautiful graphic about how that plays out in Sacramento specifically, but it's from 2015. So you know that things have probably not improved in the last 7 years. So what can we do about housing affordability? First of all, we can build new subsidized affordable homes. That means that we have to find public money to put into those homes, to subsidize its ongoing operation and the difference between the rents and what the unit could command at the market, and also to subsidize the other expectations that we tend to layer into affordable housing. So we say, hey, we're putting public money into this housing, we need to make sure it's green, we need to make sure it's ADA accessible to the utmost, we need to make sure that it's well located near amenities. There are all kinds of different layers that get put in at different funding programs. And your average affordable housing project can use as much as a dozen different funding sources to kind of layer in to make this like lasagna of budget. So here in Sacramento, our main sources of local affordable housing subsidy are impact fees when new residential development or commercial development is constructed. There have been a few different efforts around considering a general obligation bond, other kinds of recordation fees, different local sources. I encourage you to check out the Sacramento Housing Alliance's latest work to see what is most politically feasible right now. Another thing we can do is we can require market rate developers to include affordable housing when they build market rate housing. Sacramento used to have one of the best inclusionary policies in the nation. That was dismantled in favor of those fees I was talking about, where it's per square foot of new construction, instead of making sure there are affordable units mixed in with market rate units. The advantage of doing an inclusionary housing policy, it does produce some housing, but mostly what it does is it creates integrated neighborhoods. So we make sure that every time we're building new housing for the market rate, we're considering folks who need affordable housing too. And that really helps us with like our jobs housing fit. You can't just put up new condos for the white collar folks working at the Capitol. Those folks are going to want to buy their morning coffee. Their barista is going to want to live nearby. You want to make sure that barista has a place to stay. One of the other interesting things that's happened in Sacramento lately is creating community benefits agreements around publicly subsidized projects or projects that the city has assisted in some way. The Sacramento Investment Without Displacement Coalition won one around the Aggie Square expansion of the UC Davis campus. So they did some things like talking about building out first-time homebuyer programs in that neighborhood, creating additional affordable housing along the Stockton corridor. A bunch of things to sort of offset this influx of new jobs and make sure that we weren't blowing our climate goals by adding a bunch of VMT to our regional calculations for folks commuting into Aggie Square. The city has committed to creating an ordinance that would have a community benefits agreement automatically triggered for certain thresholds of projects, which one of the aspects of that would include different sorts of housing concessions that we might ask for if we, build a new soccer stadium or a football, whatever we play football in. I'm not very good at sports, but a lot of sports complexes are where you see these community benefits agreements turn up, and also these hospital expansions like Aggie Square. So I encourage you to check out the Sacramento Investment Without Displacement Coalition to learn more about those. Of Of course, we can also subsidize market rate housing. I'm just going to mention this quickly here. That's your housing choice vouchers or your Section 8, trying to give a market rate landlord the difference between the rent they want to charge and the rent you can afford. Also like first-time home buyer programs on the purchase side, right? We can also limit market rate rents, which we did both at the statewide level and at the local level a couple years ago. For any of you on the call that are tenants and wondering about your rights, do check out and road test Kick the Tires on the city's new tenant protection program. I have to say the reviews have been mixed so far from what I hear from folks trying to access the protections granted by that program. So if you try it out and have feedback like that, let me know, because I know the Housing Alliance and the Sacramento Tenants Union are really invested in making sure it works. We can also create the conditions that allow for more market rate housing. So this is kind of the argument you'll see from a lot of folks who are YIMBYs, like the Yes in My Backyard folks. And in some ways they're completely right. There's no reason that almost half our city has to be zoned for single family homes. You're going to be talking about ADUs later. That's a good way to kind of crack into the single family home problem. In the most recent general plan update, as far as I know, it was a little intimidating to say half a dozen city employees, but we did manage to eliminate single family zoning in that general plan, in part by incorporating things like ADUs and also allowing for development of like duplexes, triplexes on lots that used to just be reserved for single family homes. I will say there's a few caveats to the YIMBY approach. That's that housing markets are regional, so you can create new housing and lessen the affordability burden region-wide, but it can also cause displacement at a local level. You'll talk about housing filtering down, so becoming more affordable over time. That tends to take place on like a 30-year time frame, at which point your landlord might have ripped out subway tiles and replaced it with whatever the 2052 version of subway tiles is to make it a luxury apartment and start renting it out at a higher rate again. So finally, what we can do is take housing off the market, and that's where CLTs come in. So community land trusts are nonprofits that are governed by a board, usually made up of advocates and members and folks who live in the properties if the CLT owns properties. They hold the land in trust and separate that from the structure. So let's say a community land trust comes in and takes over a single family home. They keep control of that land, and then they can either sell or rent out the single family home at an affordable rate. And by separating the value of the land from the improvements, you can keep some of that affordability. That's what that ground lease is. Those ground leases are generally 99 years long, so essentially affordable in perpetuity. And that's different than subsidized housing, where those different kinds of affordability covenants can run out. Oftentimes like a 45, 55-year timeline, which seems long enough, until you run into what we're doing in Sacramento and across the state right now, which is we built a bunch of affordable housing in the 70s, and now it's at risk of going back to market rate. So there's a resale formula built into that ground lease that keeps homes affordable. Some land trusts also work on conservation areas, commercial real estate. So you could like start a community kitchen, have local chefs do pop-ups, that kind of thing. Pretty much anything the members, the community determines they need. In terms of real estate, the land trust can steward. So Sacramento has its very own land trust. Here's a little bit about kind of what CLTs can do. You'll see on the left there a variety of the different options that come down to owning real estate. So maybe you decide that what your neighborhood really needs is a child care center. Is there a way that can be community owned? And essentially the heart of the CLT is making sure you're keeping housing affordable permanently, you're keeping neighborhoods whole, you're preventing that kind of displacement, and you're returning power to historically discriminated communities by creating this democratic method of determining land uses. And that puts the power of the people ahead of the power of developers who can come in and remake your block and displace your grandma. I'm running out of time, but a couple things. The Sacramento CLT is up to right now We're working on a tenant opportunity to purchase or community opportunity to purchase act. This is something that's been done by several municipalities in California as well as across the nation, and it would basically give either the tenants of a building or nonprofits interested in preserving housing affordability the first right of refusal if a building went up for sale. So you're living in an apartment, you will get notice that the owner is selling. You'll get a lengthened timeline for that notice so that you can go talk to your neighbors and say, hey, do we want to try to form a tenant association and put a bid in on this building? Or maybe someone like the land trust comes in and has the opportunity to assemble all those financing sources into something that would make a competitive bid to buy that apartment building and take it off the market. So if you want to get involved with SAC-CLT, we're having a member meeting next week on Wednesday at Naked Lounge. We're going to be doing a little walking tour of some vacant lots in Oak Park that the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency has up for bid right now. I also would be remiss if I didn't say it's Big Day of Giving. So if you have a couple extra dollars to spare, please toss it towards the land trust at that link there. And in general, you can sign up for our newsletters or become a member on our website. And I'll see if Naila will grant me some question time or if I should just log off and let the city tell you some more things.
Well, because you have to go, I think, yeah, if any folks have questions for Veronica, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask them.
Question.
Perfect, Nick, go ahead.
Well, thanks for the presentation. Really fascinating. I appreciate it. I would get a sense from you is, from the CLT perspective, what are some of the public resources that you think could really be provided to support some of that work?
What public resources could be provided to support the CLT, for example?
Right. The expansion of that model, the use and the effectiveness of the model in the city.
Totally. So in other jurisdictions, we've seen things like surplus land that the city or the county, or since we're in Sacramento, the state owns, being donated to a CLT and turning that over so that they can both leverage that for additional funding, but also maintain whatever structure. There's a lot of old school buildings where this happens, kind of a thing, if your district has spare buildings. But turning over publicly owned land and putting them in the community land trust for that community stewardship. The idea of community ownership is something the housing element I was mentioning also commits to exploring, looking at different models for democratic control of housing and land. So, that's us as far as I'm concerned. It's also making sure we're eligible for things like those in lieu fees, any other public local sources of funding that the city makes available or comes up with, making sure it's written so that the CLT is eligible. And then there are also situations where a particular council member might have a project that they direct the city or direct a market rate owner to work with a CLT on. So there's also been cases where maybe there's a particularly scummy landlord that, apartment building ends up going into receivership because they've just gotten code enforcement violation after code enforcement violation. That's another situation where the city can work with us to put that land into trust. And yes, Steve, absolutely. We love our environmentalist friends. I like to brag, in Sacramento in particular, the Sacramento Housing Alliance and the Environmental Council of Sacramento have worked hand in glove for many years now to try to bring the sprawl conversation and the housing affordability conversation together. Because it's all great building 1 million micro apartments, but that doesn't serve the needs of a lot of the communities we want to represent and folks who need affordable housing, right? Can't put your whole family in a micro apartment. And then that's going to make it more appealing to drive until you qualify and actually own a single family home.
Veronica, thank you so much for the great presentation. I have a question about land use. If you purchase the land and can you affect the zoning of that parcel as well, or is this what it is?
So no, the land trust can't change the zoning on their own. That's another situation where the city and the planning commission could be could work with a land trust. So, you know, in a situation where you've gotten commercial land, for example, you know, there are all kinds of different state legislation pieces that have come down to try to make it so you can automatically make affordable housing on commercial or industrial or whatnot land. So some of that's not like a local jurisdiction decision anymore, but that rezoning can certainly be made easier in working with the city.
And you mentioned something about daycares and other uses. So is land trust only for housing, or it can be used for other uses that community needs?
All kinds of things, whatever you think the community needs. My dream is to get like a really good bodega going.
I'll hop in and throw out, Veronica, I'm a little offended that you didn't mention Morrison Creek. So that's one use is our community, the community that I've organized in, we didn't have the formal structure that was needed to go after some of like the grants and to build some of the partnerships. So we partnered with the land trust and they get to be receivers of the land. And because of their model, putting community first, we still get to be actively involved in the conversation without just handing the land over. But they have the structure where as a community, we can come together and say, this is a plot of land in our neighborhood that we want to improve. And the land trust offers that structure to be able to help us. So I can't believe you left that out, Veronica. What are we doing?
You know, I didn't feel like we'd done right by you lately, so I wasn't going to be like, check it out, what we're doing is this awesome project that Naila definitely has already told you about.
But there's a lot of great uses of the land trust, and they're able to be flexible and nimble enough to be responsive to community needs and really provide that structure to like amplify community voices in a way that like is a little bit more than advocacy. But any final questions?
And the Morrison Creek example is great because that's like the whole range of things a land trust could possibly do. You've got a little bit of conservation and restoration of the waterway. You've got a little bit of public access, active transportation space, turning that into a corridor. And you've got a little bit about thinking about the housing that's going to be adjacent to it, so we don't just make this beautiful walkable creek and have a million rich people from the Bay Area work remotely from it instead of the communities that have been living there.
Yep. All right, any final questions for Veronica before we let her go? All right, thank you so much, Veronica, for your time. Next, we're going to invite the city up. I think, Greta, I'm passing it to you, or I'll pass it to you. You pass it to who you need to pass it to. We have some folks at the city who are going to be talking about what's going on at the city regarding affordable housing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Naila. I think we did want to do the poll now because my presentation will give one of the answers away. All right, so the first one being rating your familiarity with deed restricted or regulated affordable housing production. Now you should have way more familiarity thanks to Veronica. We covered a lot of great stuff in her presentation. All right, and then the second question, sorry, I didn't realize they're both up, is what is the average total development cost per unit of a regulated affordable unit in California? Cool. Oh, I can see people changing their answer. Awesome. Well, everyone's on the right track with that second answer. The answer is the last one. C. There's no C in there, but it's between $400,000 and $500,000. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Oh, I can share the results. There you go. All right. That's fun. I don't do those very often. Thank you, Moise. Okay, gonna get to my presentation. Sharing my screen. Here we go. All right. Okay, thanks for having us here tonight. My name is Greta Seuss. I'm an associate planner in our long range planning division in planning. And I'm here with Matt Hertel, long range planning manager, and Danielle Foster, our city's housing policy manager. And I'll talk about tonight some of the city's work and policies around affordable housing and also accessory dwelling units. So I want to start by talking about housing development and what the city versus developers' roles are in constructing housing. Although the city doesn't actually construct housing, there are 4 main functions that jurisdictions have in supporting the production of housing. And those are listed on the left. So for contrast, the columns on the right list the main functions of both market rate and affordable housing developers. So the city is responsible for ensuring there's adequate land with appropriate zoning to allow for different housing types to meet our projected need. The city creates and administers the review of planning applications to ensure the projects meet the requirement of our development standards, like the general plan and our planning and development code. And we also set and administer fees to recover costs and pay for impacts that the development has on essential city infrastructure and services like parks and schools. And we seek funding to support affordable housing and infrastructure to incentivize infill development. And Veronica talked about this a little bit, but when we talk about affordable housing, we usually differentiate between 2 types, one being regulated or deed restricted affordable housing, and we usually refer to that as like the big A, capital A housing. That means the units are affordable to lower income residents for at least 55 years or a different term. Whereas the little a refers to housing that is affordable or lower cost by design, like micro units, manufactured housing, accessory dwelling units, things like that, which I'll talk about. And SHRA plays an important role in providing that regulated affordable housing, including operating public housing and providing housing choice vouchers and funding for projects. And the city, in terms of our programs, we currently collect funding to support that big A regulated affordable housing, such as our housing impact fee. And there are also a lot of programs like our city surplus properties, which Danielle works on, and charging a $0 rate of impact fees for affordable housing. There's a density bonus law. So those are all things that we work on the city side. So talking about, I just talked about how the city, funds, charges impact fees on development. So the 2 fees on development that feed into a pot of money that SHRA administers to fund that regulated affordable housing development. The first one is the Housing Trust Fund fee, also referred to as the commercial linkage fee. It's charged on non-residential development, and it's based on a nexus analysis that determines the role that new commercial development plays in attracting new lower wage earners to Sacramento. So in 2020, the city collected $2.1 million in Housing Trust Fund fees. And in 2021, we collected $1.9 million. And then the second fee that feeds into the Housing Trust Fund is the Housing Impact Fee, a fee that is established by the Mixed Income Housing Ordinance. And this is a fee that's only charged on residential developments, whereas the other fee is the commercial fee. And the fee currently includes exemptions for higher density projects and also has a reduced fee in areas where market rate housing is more affordable. So in 2020, the city collected $1 million in housing impact fees and about $700,000 in 2021. So when we talk about housing production in the city, how do we measure our progress? Through the housing element, which I'll talk about in a second. The city has to plan to accommodate our regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA. And this is an allocation of housing units the city has to plan for over an 8-year period that is assigned to the city from the state and regional governments. So the 2021-29 housing element period housing target is over 45,000 housing units, which is broken down by income level from very low income housing to above moderate income housing. And when we break that down over the 8-year period, we have to produce around 5,700 units annually across all income levels. So the last couple of years, we've produced a significant amount of housing. However, we're still 2,000 units short to meet our actual need based on that target. And this graph shows our 2021 housing production numbers by income level in comparison to the projected need averaged over the 8-year period. So in 2021, we produced a total of 3,364 housing units. That included a total of 1,235 units of low, very low, and extremely low housing units, income housing units. And that's only 12 units less than 2020 and 35% of our total units produced in 2021. So we're meeting our goal for lower income units via production of deed restricted and non-deed restricted units. However, the very low and extremely low units require more subsidy to produce. And so while deed restricted unit production is critical to ensure long-term affordable housing in our community, we know we can't meet that full lower income arena with deed restricted units alone. To meet our lower income housing need through only regulated affordable housing, we would need to find $7.5 billion in the next 8 years, with the city of Sacramento's portion being around $2 billion. So in order to meet this huge need for lower cost housing, we have to build regulated affordable housing, but we also have to build more lower cost housing that doesn't require subsidy, like multi-unit housing or accessory dwelling units. So I'm going to start talking a little bit more about the housing element now, because the housing element provides the direction for our work on our housing goals. And it's an element of the general plan that's on an 8-year update cycle. And it's our 8-year housing strategy for how we're going to meet our goals through policies and programs. So it's organized into 8 goals that create the framework for how we're going to address our needs. And I'm going to dig into some of the policies and programs that address goal 2, increasing affordable and workforce housing production, and goal 3, promoting accessory dwelling units. However, there might be some other goals that you're interested in personally, so you can check out the housing element if that's the case. So starting with goal 2, some of the key policies aimed at increasing affordable housing production in the housing element are providing opportunities for affordable housing throughout the city, maximizing the use of public properties for affordable housing, providing fee deferrals and $0 impact fees for affordable housing, creating additional funding for affordable housing, and setting aside a % of new enhanced infrastructure financing districts. So we talked about Veronica was talking about Aggie Square. That's one example. So those are some of the policies in around goal 2, and the programs that we've committed to related to this are reviewing the city's mixed income housing ordinance, which I'll dig into a bit more, establishing new sources of funding for affordable housing, which, as you know now, is very critical, achieving the state's pro-housing designation so we could be more competitive for state funds, which we achieved in February. We're going to be looking at rezoning additional affordable housing sites in our highest resource neighborhoods to accommodate affordable housing development, supporting collective ownership models, and looking at financing for affordable housing. So the first one on that list, the program H1, is a big upcoming implementation program. The city's committed to reviewing the existing mixed income housing ordinance and to considering changes to the ordinance with the goal of increasing the amount of affordable housing built in the city while ensuring the requirements don't pose a constraint to overall housing production. The current mixed income housing ordinance consists of 2 components. The first is that fee that I talked about, the housing impact fee that's on market rate residential developments. And the second is the requirement of a mixed income housing strategy for projects of 100 acres or more in size. So we're going to be looking at the current ordinance, how it's performed, and we'll be studying the feasibility of changes to the ordinance, such as removing the fee exemptions for high density projects of the housing impact fee, increasing the fee rate or requiring affordable units to be produced on site, also referred to as an inclusionary requirement, or a combination of those types of things. So we'll be kicking off this project later this month with the consultant team, and we'll begin stakeholder engagement in the summer and fall. And we plan to hold public workshops on changes to this ordinance in the winter and adopt changes early in 2023. Another key program that was listed was the identification of additional sites in high resource areas of our city that can be rezoned to accommodate multi-unit affordable housing by right. So those are the dark blue and aqua areas of the map. And this will happen after the city's adoption of the 2040 general plan in conjunction with a citywide rezone as a result of that. And it's important because currently in those areas of our city, those darker blue areas on the map, the opportunity to build affordable housing in those areas just doesn't exist very much because those areas are zoned for lower density housing. So moving on to some of our ADU goals and programs, the city, as a part of the housing element, committed to developing an online ADU toolkit with resources and educational materials, including permit-ready ADU plans for Sacramento residents that will be ADA accessible and vary in square footage. And the city also committed to identifying potential funding sources and community partners to develop and implement a financial assistance program for affordable ADUs. So the online ADU Resource Center will feature a step-by-step process for how to build and operate an ADU. And the website will also feature the release of free permit-ready plans, a site planning tool, and a financial calculator. This is a screenshot of the Symbiom site planning tool. This is actually available now. If you go to symbiom.com and type in your address, if it's in the city of Sacramento, you can see where an ADU fits on your lot according to our planning and development code. If you move that box around on your site, it will start to turn red if it's not in the required setbacks, for example. And this is a screenshot of one of our upcoming free permit-ready ADU plans. So there will be 3 models available: a studio, 1-bed, and 2-bed, and they will all be ADA accessible. And these will already be approved by the planning and building department. So all someone would need is to provide a site plan to show where the ADU would be on the property to submit it to gain approval. And they're all going to be under 750 square feet, which is on purpose to take advantage of those reduced fees that we have for any ADU that's 750 square feet or less, doesn't have to pay impact fees. So that's really great too. And this is just a quick graph showing our ADU production over the 2013 to 2021. So this past year, we produced a lot more ADUs than the previous, and we're expecting those numbers to jump. So yeah, that's all I had for today. I'm available for questions, as is Matt and Danielle. Oh, thanks for posting the link in the chat, Matt.
Can I just highlight one more thing?
Of course.
Greta did an awesome job, but there had been mentioned, I think Veronica had mentioned the anti-displacement work that we're doing, which I think is exciting and just worth noting for this group. And specifically around Aggie Square, we're trying to recognize that we want to definitely balance reinvestment, right? And make sure that we are also keeping the character of the neighborhood and providing opportunities for existing residents and support to existing residents. And so we're really doing a concerted effort around anti-displacement on the housing side, around the zip codes surrounding Aggie Square along Stockton, and I can get you the specific zip codes, but related to that, we just finished a survey with assistance from community-based organization partners to hear from the community what kind of programs they most need related to anti-displacement. And we kind of outlined options around that, but it's been really helpful to get that survey information back as we're starting to provide additional anti-displacement programming. And over the next couple of months, we'll be working to contract with nonprofits to bring some additional resources online. But the highest response we got was around home repair programs and bill assistance programs, sort of unexpected bill costs that come up. It's usually car repairs, medical expenses, things like that. We're still doing rental assistance and utility assistance through the emergency rental assistance program. But I just want to highlight that because I think it was an innovative step and, an important step that we got to with the Sacramento Investment Without Displacement conversations and commitments both from the city and the university. The city's put in $5 million in and the university's putting $5 million in. So we've got $10 million to start to help stabilize those neighborhoods as, rents continue to increase. So anyway, I just want to highlight that. And if there's any questions about that, happy to take it. But I did want to say that in our housing element, we have policies now that will replicate this model as we're working in new neighborhoods and really focusing on reinvestments.
Thank you. And so I know, Erin, you unmuted. Did you have a
Yeah, I
question?
did have a question. I was interested, especially with a lot of people, office buildings not being in as much use, if the city has any programs or is working on building more affordable housing or conversion of office buildings in Midtown, downtown.
I'll also say quickly that the ability to do that is generally already there, like in terms of the zoning and general plan. Those requirements are generally pretty flexible, especially downtown, to allow residential or commercial. So I think it's up to the interest and funding and stuff like that. But I think Danielle, you were going to say something about it. So
yeah, no, it's a great question, Erin. Thank you for asking it. It's something that we're engaged on and we're talking to developers about. I think the city has taken a lot of steps to make it more conducive for conversion of uses like Greta just laid out. The big challenge is the actual building code requirements and the conversion. The two things that are hardest to convert from office to residential is getting utilities throughout the building because, offices typically have one set of bathrooms, in the middle of the hall or wherever, and not distributed throughout the floor, and windows, because when you think about fire safety in a residential home, any sleeping bedroom needs to have a window as a secondary access or exit. So those two things kind of come up as challenges. So sometimes the cost of conversion is getting in the way more than city regulation by far. But we are trying to look at incentives and opportunities to work with the development community on conversion because we know office space is becoming more and more vacant. So.
Great, thank you.
All right, Steve, I'm going to pass it to you. If you're in one of the attendees and you have a question, please use the question and answer feature, but EJCGC members, you can just raise your hand and I will call on you. I just wanted to clarify the comment in the chat. So Steve and then Nick.
Thanks, Naila. Great presentation. I kind of feel like whether or not we have enough housing is not exactly the right question to be asking even. I feel like what is indisputable, though, is that there's not enough housing that people can actually afford. And of course, with the Fed raising interest rates in addition to inflationary pressures, this has exacerbated a situation where the rents, were already too high to begin with. COVID isn't over, and the notion that a single person is being displaced now is low-key abhorrent to me. I did some back of the napkin calculations before this meeting that revealed that we can house every single person experiencing homelessness nearly 2.5 times over with the estimated vacant housing that we already have here in the city. We could use eminent domain to acquire properties and house people experiencing homelessness and upzone those parcels to support multifamily. But let's just say, for the purposes of moving the conversation along, that I were to agree with this notion that we don't have enough housing here. I would say that the current policies regarding development don't result in the creation of enough units that the average person living here can actually afford in a reasonable enough time frame. The housing trust fund fee and housing impact fees, they haven't resulted in enough low income residents housed to be able to, with good conscience, say that we're doing enough. There's no way that developers will create over 17,000 housing units for extremely low, very low, and low income housing with current policies in place. After all, they built fewer than 300 units of extremely low and low units in 2021. And developers, if I'm interpreting that slide correctly, missed the mark on every single category: extremely low, very low, low, moderate, and even above moderate. And I just bring this up because I reminded council at the meeting on April 6th of this year. I've been testifying as early as the housing workshop that Mayor Steinberg called back in 2018, that being priced out of an area is a trauma that no one should have to deal with, and that we cannot wait for additional supply to come online, especially when developers admit that they essentially won't build anything but luxury apartments because it has the highest profit and the shortest return on investment. That does absolutely nothing to address the issue of affordable housing whatsoever, except for this ridiculous thing they do where they reserve a few units as affordable for a certain amount of time, and then they're converted back to market rate. These things like the Powerhouse 16, 800J lofts, 19J, they're not just ugly, they're pretty shameful. And why is it that not just electeds, but also staff and even certain advocates get these glazed looks in their eyes when I bring up the notion of high density public housing? I would assume that their attitudes are colored by what public housing currently is and what it used to be in this country, which is shameful, dilapidated buildings. But this was and continues to be the result of intentional policy decisions like budget cuts and understaffing. Other countries have public housing and it's not a problem at all. And it's going to get to the point where tourists just straight up aren't going to come here anymore because they can't fathom the brutality of a system that would allow so many people to just live on the streets and in their cars like we do. There is a solution, and it's not outside the bounds of reason. What is outside the bounds of reason is allowing people to languish and die out in the elements and the numbers they do, and continue to ignore the problem and do these half measures that don't tangibly get people off the streets and avoid displacement on people on the margins right now, and for whom this year will be a particularly tough time, like I said, given the rise in prices across the board and wages not keeping up. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Steve, thank you for all of that. And I also am going to throw in the Oakland vacant property tax. It was something, one of the comments you mentioned earlier referenced about having all these vacant lots or vacant properties. We had a comment that popped up in the chat that I just want to address around, this is not, the EJCGC is not a city ran committee, so we're not subject to Bagley-Keene or Brown Act. We're doing our best to make sure that folks and communities are involved, but so it's not a public meeting, just so everyone is clear. So we have Nick with his hand, Janice, and then I have a few comments, and we also have 10 minutes. So I want to make sure we end on time. So I may cut comments a little short just so we can move us.
Sure, thanks, Mary. Thank you for the presentation. I had a question for the city, and then if you could put up the slide going back, I think went quickly over something I think can be very important, particularly for pertinent to this group, the environmental justice group. you can go back to the slide where you're looking at ways to build in high opportunity or high income areas in the city. If you can pull that back up, I think that's something that kind of go back to. My first question is about ADUs. As far as I applaud the city building a kind of off the shelf system. I think that's where we're going in California. So applaud you for that. A question related to that was, I know we must have, like, across the state, a high inventory of folks that built ADUs prior to regulated reform. Does the city have a plan for kind of bringing folks out the dark and getting those folks permitted without, excessive penalty or fine? I think that's kind of I think that is related to income and very important to our communities.
Yeah, appreciate that question, Nick and Matt from Long Range Planning. I can probably speak to that. But yeah, in terms of your comment about ADUs and allowing greater array of housing types in these high opportunity areas, absolutely part of that strategy. And we're excited to see more and more movement there. Yeah, and so when a structure is built or developed and doesn't go through the permitting process, it can be described as kind of a non-conforming use. And so we do work very closely with property owners that have accessory structures or other things that haven't been permitted, to work with them to just make sure that the real concern there is obviously making sure that it meets the California Building Code. And so that's a safe structure, because if someone's going to live in it, want to make sure it's a safe structure for that individual or family. So we do work closely with folks that do that. And a lot of times, it's complaint based, or if someone notifies that there may be an unsafe structure, we'll go out there, look at it. But our code and zoning code administrator divisions work on that closely with folks.
And I encourage the city to be more forward about asking folks to come out in the dark and find a pathway to get them regulated. Can you pull up that slide real quick on the city? I was kind of wanting to highlight again. I think this is a tremendous strategy for us to build in neighborhoods that already have tree canopy, that already are focused on health across many spectrums. I think it's going to be inherent to all of us who are active in our communities to support the city's proposal in this. I don't think it's to anyone's concern, anyone's surprise that there may be pushback on where the city is proposing to build kind of more by right housing. And so I just challenge and I support the city, and I'm hoping that we all can show up and support them in that plan to build in neighborhoods are well built out already, but provide, as they note, great opportunities for low-income children in our communities. So I applaud you for that, and I hope we can support you.
All right, thank you. Janice?
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Janice. Nice to meet you guys. I enjoyed the presentation. I jumped in a little late, but it was nice hearing what you guys had to say and what you guys presented. One of my questions, I had a couple questions, just two. For one, you guys talked about the money that you guys had received to do what you guys plan to do. And my question, one of my main questions is very important to me, was this money like grants, or is this money that taxpayers have to pay back like as the years go on? Like, was it money that you guys just got, that you received, like grant money, or is this money that like the citizens and the people of the county have to pay back over years? And then I'll jump in with my other question.
Yeah, the fees the funds that I talked about with the housing impact fee and the housing trust fund fee that go into the housing trust fund, those are fees that we charge on new development. So they're not having to be paid back. Those are fees that are being paid when development occurs. In order to get your permit to build whatever construction, you pay that fee on a per square foot basis. And then that goes into a fund that SHRA administers to dole out to different projects, that affordable housing projects.
Okay, thank you. And my other question was that once this, and say this does fall through and you guys are able to follow up with these plans, what would be the priority in the measure in which you guys would have to house? Would you guys house the low income families first, single mothers, homeless? Like, what would be the system to where you would prioritize who gets housed first and when?
Yeah, that's a great question. So anytime there's new affordable housing, there's an application process like any apartment complex. And the prioritization, it's going to be different based on the type of development. So some development is focused on seniors versus families, or different size of units. But it's usually a combination of there's different apartments focused on different income levels. So they have to match people's incomes to the apartments that are serving them. But it's mostly first come, first serve, or they'll do a lottery system depending on the organization.
And then following up with that, and then I'm done. One of my major things will be, what will you guys be doing in order to get the word out? Because there are, say, homeless people who would like to have these low income, like housing that is affordable for them that they can't afford, because obviously they're homeless for a reason, to where it's just like, this is something that they may be interested in. How are they supposed to hear about this? How are they supposed to know about this? Like, what are you guys doing, or what are your plans to do in order to spread the word to where this is accessible for anybody?
Yeah, great question. We, in partnership with SHRA, we provide community information on affordable housing, and SHRA provides ongoing information in that way because they're both sort of the clearinghouse for voucher, which is the rental assistance program, Section 8 vouchers or housing choice vouchers. And as well as they provide the direct subsidies for the development of the projects. So most community members will go to them first when looking for affordable housing. We're also working on 211 becoming more of a centralized location for housing and homeless services. So anybody could call 211 and get more information.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, and then we have 2 questions in the chat that I think we'll ask the city to answer offline, and then we can email it out when we send the meeting notes. My question is around one, I think this first question will be really quick. With the electrification ordinance, I'm assuming that the ADUs are going to fall under that they have to be fully electric.
Yeah, that is correct. The permit ready plans, they'll be available, are all electric. Yep.
Okay, and then my second question is, I'm super excited about ADUs. I want to have a multi-generational family. I want to move my parents into my backyard, but I know that that's not necessarily the case for everyone. And so are there conversations about renter protections? Because if we're letting everyone build ADUs, then we're going to have a bunch of new landlords potentially in the city, and we want to make sure that people are safe and in safe environments. So are there any conversations around rental protections as we talk about ADUs?
Just say generally they'll be subject to the same rules as like a single family home or single unit dwelling. They're considered dwelling units, so they would be subject to the tenant protection program, be subject to the rental housing inspection program, et cetera. So yes, they'll be applied just like they are in other dwelling units.
All right, so I'm going to open this time up just for any announcements. That we have 1 minute. Any announcements that folks want to make about things coming up? If you're in the audience and want to share an announcement, please put it in the chat. And if you can't chat to everyone, I make sure that I'll amplify it so everyone can see. I know that the next meeting, we potentially will be talking about the climate action plan. I know there are some folks right now, the city is having a lot of budget conversations. One of the asks that we'll be sending out probably separate in an email is folks are asking people to call in and urge the city to fund climate action now. And so we'll have that email blast that we send out later. And any other announcements from folks of upcoming events, upcoming things? May is Bike Month, so please bike. All right. I think we will end the webinar, and if folks can leave just so we're on time. I have a few more minutes if folks want to stay. If anybody from the city can stay a little longer, that would be greatly appreciated. And we can continue some of this conversation if folks feel inclined. But I can't stay too long. My 3-year-old is only going to let me stay like 5-10 minutes, though, just so we're clear. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for your time today. All right.
I'll also just note, as mentioned, the Q&A questions, I've noted them. And so I will pass those along to city folks after to hopefully follow up.
Perfect. All right. And yeah, I'm sorry, you guys were able to capture them too, though, right? Or if Barry, if you're still on and you have the questions, or Brenda, let's see if we can we just promote? Oh, there we go. Boys, you're quick. Brenda, go ahead, and then let's make sure we promote Barry. Barry, can you raise your hand so we can also figure out which account to promote? There we go. You guys both should be able to ask your question.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Hi, this is Brenda from the Food Policy Council. Been monitoring these by notes, and this is my first one of these I think I've attended in a while. And a couple of questions. You may have covered it already, so if someone can refer me to where to find the information. Is this group exploring issues of food access and food system issues in the built environment, such as encouraging HOAs to allow the growing of front yard gardens and rooftop spaces and all that stuff? Because I understand that these conversations are about maybe built environment. And I'd love to meet with y'all offline and learn more about this group. The second part is, when is the city, probably more for city, when is the city going to be doing its general plan outreach and you know, some series or sessions? Jennifer, I think on other groups and other calls, there was supposed, I think in the spring and summer, when that's ready to be rolled out. The Food Policy Council would love to partner with the EJ committee and with the city on making some opportunities for people to have input. And I guess a lot of follow-up. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Brenda. I'm happy to answer a question about the general plan, and be looking forward to partnering with you and your group to make sure we can engage folks and get input on these important topics that'll be covered in environmental justice element and other areas of the general plan. But as you know, it's been a massive undertaking. We're essentially rewriting the entire general plan and 10 community plans and doing a master environmental impact report. So it has taken a bit longer than we anticipated to have a public review draft ready. We're working diligently to get that out. So we'll have robust engagement. It'll be in the summer, and I'm hoping that in the near future we'll have concrete dates, and we'll be sure to get it out far and wide to all our partners and residents and stakeholders to make sure that folks feel and they can get fully engaged in it, because we're really excited to get input and ground truth, the policies and goals and actions that we put in there based on all the feedback we've heard from folks over the last 2.5 years. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and Brenda, to answer your question about the EJCGC, goodness, this group specifically, food access is so what we did a few months ago is we asked folks what topics they wanted to talk about this year, and our calendar is mostly completed. I think food access is an area of interest, and so where we can talk about it, absolutely, I think you would be the person that I would reach out to, especially if you guys have something coming up around, I don't remember the name of the report that you guys put out not too long ago, but if there's like some type of follow-up or something that's like timely about it, definitely reach out to me, because we can bump that up on the calendar so that we can make sure that we're having the relevant discussion.
Sure, definitely no rush on any of these. I've been wanting to reach out to you, and there's so many good things to do and crummy things to fight against. So yeah, I'm excited to partner more, and I will let you know. It's the Sacramento Food System Assessment.
Yeah, there we go.
So yeah, and and if there's overlay with the GPU, then that's awesome. So it's less meetings for people to attend and go to and provide their input. We can certainly share everything that we're learning with y'all.
Yeah, thank you. Barry?
Yes, thank you, and good evening to everyone. And I do appreciate greatly being elevated to use my voice because my typing skills suck and very slow. But with that, a couple of questions that I did place in I believe in the Q&A to Danielle. I wanted to ask, who are the communities that your group spoke to in regards to getting the general information that you presented this evening? And also, how did you guys notice that these workshops, i.e. surveys, would be taking place for all concerned stakeholders here in the city of Sacramento? That's the part one and part two of my first question.
Yeah, so the anti-displacement work that I was speaking to is the work we're doing specifically around Aggie Square and Stockton Boulevard. So it was a pretty focused area, and it's based on our agreements with the community, with Sacramento Investment Without Displacement and the university, and those in the community benefits agreement around which zip codes we would focus in on. So I put them in the chat, but it's 95817. It's neighborhoods surrounding kind of the Stockton Boulevard area, since they're the most at risk. And then we worked in collaboration with some community-based organizations, including the Oak Park Panthers, Unseen Heroes, CPALs, and some of our just community partners in getting the word out, as well as doing direct phone surveys. So we were actually calling people's phone numbers and those zip codes to get as much input as we could. And we got just under 400 surveys back. So we definitely got a statistically significant sampling for the neighborhoods that we're working to serve.
I appreciate that. So with that information, of course, then being putting a finer point on it is just directed simply at the Aggie Square-esque development, and not a opinions warranted from the entirety of the city of Sacramento in regards to displacement. So the information that you're presenting, if you said it, my apologies, but if you would have stated that it was specifically to the area that you just stated, that the information is has been derived from, then I may not have asked my question. But just for clarity going forward, my opinion in future presentations, just being very clear on the area of the focus of the presentation, the area of focus that the answers were being given for, because I thought you were speaking citywide, and that is why I engaged the question of I didn't see any noticing of it. But thank you for that, Danielle. Second, my last question here is, well, I had two, but the policy, or for Matt, Greta, or anyone, I'm not trying to single you guys out, but you're from the city. My question is, what are the policies, and/or are there policies in regards to short-term rentals, i.e. Airbnb and the like, for ADUs here in the city of Sacramento?
Hey, good evening. Yeah, in terms of how short-term rentals, so we have an ordinance in place now that allows homeowners, property owners to rent out their unit or room for a short-term rental, right? The most popular being Airbnb, up to 90 days maximum in a calendar year. So there's a lot of restrictions around that. Folks have to be registered with the city and licensed the city to be able to do that, and that's monitored and tracked. If folks want to do a short-term rental beyond that, more than 90 calendar days in a year, they would have to essentially get a license to operate a bed and breakfast. So there is some restrictions in terms of the number of days that those units can be rented out, but there is no regulation in place in terms of how individuals rent out their properties for any type of units, whether it be single family homes or ADUs. But the beauty of providing a new unit is that it's a new unit for a very long time, right? So life of the unit's about 55 years, let's say. If it's not rehabbed, hopefully it's much, much longer than that. People take care of the homes and are able to do that. So if it's a short-term rental tomorrow, it could be a permanent home, the next day, right? And so that's their turnover and change out for units occurs all the time. And there's a filtering that occurs as well. The more units you have, folks move up. And so it moves around all the time, but the real importance is getting those new units online, and trying to regulate them is where we can. We have a program in place to encourage folks to rent out to housing choice vouchers, to rent these ADUs to affordable folks. So we'll be working on that program and digging into it more as the 8-year period progresses.
I appreciate that. I didn't know that there was a 90-day window in place, which is fine by me. But specifically for my question, for those who would use the short-term rentals in regards to overnight, weekend stays, to which are more of what the Airbnb model is, the extreme short. But I bring the question up in regards, since the city of Sacramento is using the ADUs in their data to accommodate part of the housing inventory that HCD is requesting in regards to RENA numbers. That is why I'm asking the policy for ADUs in specific, since ADUs are a big push for the city to that the city is putting out there to bring online to be used for permanent housing, as again for accommodating RENA numbers. So with that, it would seem to me that there would have to be in place policies that would not allow the overnight, weekend, anything less than 30 days, as you would with an apartment rental, so forth, so on. And is there discussion taking place for a policy of that nature to come online? And if not, I'm kind of curious how the city is using ADUs, again, as a part of the housing inventory for the RENA numbers for the city of Sacramento, if they are including ADUs that may only be rented overnight or anytime less than 30 days.
Yeah, so accessory dwelling units are.
Matt, before you
Oh,
answer,
sure, of course.
after Matt answers, we're gonna have to end the Zoom. I'm gonna throw my email and Moise's email in the chat. Send your questions and we will make sure that we also send out answers. But yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so accessory dwelling units are essentially smaller. They're treated like under the California Building Code, just like single unit dwellings or single family homes, right? And so folks also rent out their single family homes for Airbnb. And so it's really no different in that way. The difference is obviously that you can do it in your backyard and the land's already there. There is no plan in place policy, plan in place, to my knowledge, that would look at restrictions around that. That didn't come up during the housing element discussions or input and outreach. And I don't believe council's considering any policy this time.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
All right, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for a few extra minutes. I love a good, fruitful, contentious, spicy meeting. I think we get a lot of places when we lean into that. And so thank you so much again. Please feel free to email Moise and me. I'll be really honest, email Moise, you'll get a quicker response. But please, we want to make sure we send the answers out in the future, or so people's questions don't go unanswered. So thank you so much, you guys. Have a good Thursday, a good weekend.